Good morning. It is Saturday, May the 21st, and this is The True Conservative. Welcome to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. I'm Ron, your host, and the only true conservative in the United States today. So today, after the daily declaration for spiritual warfare and the Pledge of Allegiance and the Star Spangled Banner, we will have How Much is Enough? No Luck. No Good Guys in Washington. No Free Lunch. Fossil Fuels, and Hondo. All that and more when I get back. Thank you. And now the daily declaration for spiritual warfare, biblical principles to defeat the devil for May the 21st. My river of blessing flows into every valley place. My child, my river of blessing is starting to flow into all your valley places. Lift up your eyes to me. Do not bow down in your valley experience and lose hope, for I have promised to send my living water to be a fountain of blessing to you. The mountains will drip with the new vine of my spirit, new wine of my spirit, and a fountain of living water will flow from my throne to water all your valley places. Every valley shall be filled, and every mountain and hill brought low. The crooked places will be made straight, and the rough ways smooth. You will see the salvation of your God, and you will arise in hope. Though you walk through the valley of the shadow of death, fear no evil, for I am with you. My rod and my staff will comfort you, and I will prepare a table of my blessing in the presence of all your enemies. Joel 3:18, Luke 3:5, Psalm 23:4. Prayer declaration. Lord, I praise your name for the river of your blessing that is beginning to flow in my life, filling up all my valley places. I will arise in hope, for I can see the salvation of my Lord flowing into my life. I will no longer fear the darkness and uncertainty of the valley, for even though I have to walk through a valley of death, you will be with me with your comfort and blessing. Amen. And that was the daily declaration for spiritual warfare, biblical principles to defeat the devil for May the 21st. Thank you. Who is the true conservative? He is religious. He is patriotic and uses common sense. He makes judgments, refuses to speculate, speaks clearly and definitively, and is not afraid to say no. He's open-minded and asks why rather than why not. He is consistent, credible, and influential. Not ashamed of his existence, unafraid to learn or correct his mistakes, he is a normal American. Thank you, thank you. Who is the socialist? He is the man that is spiritual. He's the man that seeks consensus. He's subjective, petty, and small, taking everything in life personally. He's outrageous, boring, and rude. He pretends to be a leader and a change agent. He pretends that he's your friend. He is sly, cunning, and deceptive. He dresses, acts, and speaks like a slob. He is informal and terminally unique. He is childish and pretends that he knows nothing. He has no conscience and pretends that might makes right and that the ends justify the means. He is impulsive and rationalizes his behavior. He is deterministic, blaming others for his mistakes. He is skeptical, demanding that others solve his problems. His unreasonableness and irresponsibility make him a bad role model, bad father, brother, family member, friend, and a bad person, period. So if you think that you can be friends with a socialist, think again. Thank you, thank you. So this is a message to all the Republican politicians. Usually the way things shape up is that the left is on the side of labor and the right is on the side of management. And it's the only reason it's that way is because the left says so. The left has set it up that way. Left-wing journalists ask questions designed to put the Republicans in one camp and the left in the other. And of course, the idea is that the left is more sympathetic because therefore the average Joe or the little guy, whatever. Now, the right doesn't want to get, lately, they don't want to have to support management because they're, in part because management, there's a lot of, somebody the other day just got a $52 million bonus, a CEO. A $52 million bonus. Now, this is all has to do with determinism. Baseball players being overpaid, soccer players, football players, all of these athletes and entertainers, they get grossly overpaid. You know, there's no way you can tell me that anybody's worth $50 million a picture or $30 million a year to throw a baseball. There's no way. There's no way to convince me that that's the case. It just isn't. It's bullshit. Okay, so then CEOs getting $52 million a year as a bonus is also bullshit. What you as a Republican politician need to do the next time you're dealing with CEOs and you talk to them about their bonuses and say, hey, here's an idea. If you want to help us support you, your corporation, your business, and be able to sell it to the American people as necessary and vital for the economy and for their pocketbook, this is what you do. Next time you're going to be given a $52 million bonus, you tell the board of directors, no, this is what we're going to do. We're going to take this $52 million and we're going to split it up amongst every employee in the company. So if you got 10,000 employees, everybody gets $5,200. Much better. Much, much better. And the reason I'm saying this is all about determinism is it brings up the question, how much is enough? How much is enough for the CEO? CEO is already getting paid, tens of millions of dollars a year, maybe more. The CEO has a retirement package worth tens of millions more, and now he's getting $52 million as a bonus. When do you say enough? When do you as a CEO, as a moral human being, as a moral agent say, you know what? No, I can't take this. It's obscene. How much is enough? I'm quoting the movie Breaking Bad, when Tyler, the character, was her name Tyler? I don't know, whatever. Tyler, Skyler, whatever. Skyler. Skyler says to her husband, she opens up a storage unit with a big pile of cash in the middle of it. And she says, I can't even count it. I don't even know where to begin. Because he asks, how much is here? She says, I have no idea. She says, it comes in faster than I can count it. And so what I did was I rented this storage unit and I started putting all the money in this storage unit. And he ends up, of course, putting it into trash can barrels and burying it out in the desert somewhere. But anyways, she asks him, how much is enough? How much is enough? And I think that's right after that point, he decides to retire from the meth business. So, but that's the same question I pose to everybody that's the politicians, to the CEOs, the baseball players, the entertainers. How much is enough? When do you get to the point where you say, no, stop? Okay, and the same thing goes to all the people that are paying these people, the people that own ball clubs, the people that own production companies and movie houses or whatever, whoever's paying the entertainers and the boards of directors. When do you get to the point where you say, enough? When do you get to the point where you stop and say, you know what, he's not worth it? Nobody's worth $52 million. Nobody. Okay, so how much is enough? That's what I challenge all the people in positions where they're making millions and millions of dollars. And it's actually a good question for all of us. How much is enough? You know, if I win $400 million in the lottery, do I keep playing the lottery? Think about it. Thank you. The cult of luck. You're going to hear a lot, and I just heard it right now, that usually they don't use the word luck, they use the word fortunate. The left will get out on and have commercials talking about how fortunate they are to do this or have that or whatever. And I heard the commercial from we're the Goo Goo Dolls, and we're fortunate that our children have the kind of nutrition that they need to have. Any time that you hear that, as a true conservative, you've got to throw the bullshit flag. So you got to ask these people, excuse me, you mean you got lucky? You got where you are, like with the Goo Goo Dolls, you got lucky? You became a hit band by just sheer luck? You woke up one day and all of a sudden you were a hit? You were all of a sudden touring? Is that the way it was? And your children, they got what they want by luck? You went and took all of your money and you went to Vegas and you put it all on red? And it paid off, and so now your kids are able to be fed? Or did you go and make a budget, or did you make plans to make sure that your children got what they need? Okay, you have to throw the bullshit flag on this kind of thing. The life and success is not about fortune, getting lucky, and it's not about cheating. It's about doing the right thing, acting as a moral agent, being a real parent to your child, and making sure they're provided for. And again, luck has little, very, very, very little, if nothing, to do with it at all. Don't forget that. One of the biggest mistakes that conservative talk show hosts make is thinking that there's good guys in Washington. It's amazing to watch these folks. Every one of them does it. They'll invite a Republican onto the show. They say they invite Democrats and whatnot, and I don't know, maybe they do, but they never end up talking to any of these Democrats. Anyway, so they invite a Republican onto the show, and it's all very collegial and chummy and, kumbaya and all that stuff, because they think that that anybody in Washington with an R after their name, with maybe a couple of exceptions, is one of the good guys. And it's stupid. It's ignorant. It's naive. And it's got to stop. Okay? Everybody within the sound of my voice, you got to understand there's no good guys in Washington. They just don't exist. So every one of them needs to be treated, I don't know what analogy I want to use, but basically with contempt. You have to hammer these folks. I don't care if they say they have an R after the name, a D after their name. Look at what the Republicans are doing or not doing now. What happens when the Republicans take office in January? What are their plans? No answer. We have no answer as to what it is that they're going to do. No mandate, no nothing. And they're busy using everything, all the destructive tendencies of the current administration to win seats in the next election. They're doing nothing to try to stop this administration from doing the things it's doing. The only one that's actually doing things to thwart the administration is Ron DeSantis. He's the only one. This is why he's got to be one of my top choices for president. So he's in a position of power, and he's using it to thwart the administration. The administration says this, he goes out ahead and signs legislation to nix it. And that's what Republicans and conservatives have to understand. There's no good guys in Washington. You need to understand that. Okay, because all you do all the right-wing talk show hosts do when they have somebody on that's a Republican, and they're, oh, hi, how are you? Well, you're, and kissing their butt is letting them off the hook. You're giving them, number one, you're giving them free advertising for the next political campaign, right? Free name recognition. And other than that, you're not doing anybody any good. They then relax. They have nothing to worry about because Sean Hannity is in their corner, that kind of thing. No, every one of these SOBs has to be hammered constantly. What are you doing? What are you doing? What are you doing? When is it going to get done? They've promised the Republicans for years to defund Planned Parenthood. Where is it? Where is it? Why aren't they doing it right now? Okay. And then when they get into power in January, it should be number one. Absolutely 100% number one thing has to be defund Planned Parenthood. If things turn out the way this looks like it's going to turn out, there should be a bulletproof majority in the Senate. So that means we don't need Collins and Murkowski. They can vote no all they want to on defunding Planned Parenthood. Nobody cares. Okay, so they got to get, that's number one. Number two should actually probably be the other old promise that they keep reneging on, and that is replacing what is called Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act. So, but anyways, the point is there's no good guys in Washington. Don't relax. Don't think, oh wow, the Republicans are in power. Everything's going to be good now. It won't be. These guys have their own interests. The Republican National Committee only wants fundraisers elected, because that's what they want. They want to raise money to elect people, to raise money to elect people, not to fix your roads, not to solve the problems in your district or in your state, but to solve the problems of the Republican National Committee. So remember, again, to sum up, to review, there are no good guys in Washington or any state capital either, for that matter. Thank you. And now there's no free lunch. Quote, if our own misery pinches us very severely, we have no leisure to attend to that of our neighbor, unquote. Adam Smith. Prosperity is necessary for a good society in that it allows us the luxury of empathy, sacrifice, and generosity. And that was, there's no free lunch. Thank you. And now the moral case for fossil fuels. Where did the thinkers go wrong? One thing I've noticed in reading most predictions of doom is that the experts almost always focus on the risks of a technology, but never the benefits. And on top of that, those who predict the most risk get the most attention from the media and from politicians who want to do something. But there's a little to no focus on the benefits of cheap, reliable energy from fossil fuels. This is a failure to think big picture, to consider all the benefits and all the risks, and the benefits of cheap, reliable energy to power the machines that civilization runs on are enormous. They are just as fundamental to life as food, clothing, shelter, and medical care. Indeed, all of these require cheap, reliable energy. But failing to consider the benefits of fossil fuel energy, the experts didn't anticipate the spectacular benefits that energy brought about in the last 30 years. At the same time, we do have to consider the risks, including predictions that using fossil fuel energy will lead to catastrophic resource depletion, catastrophic pollution, and catastrophic climate change. How did those predictions fare? Even if the overall trends are positive, might the anti-fossil fuel experts have been right about catastrophic depletion, catastrophic pollution, and catastrophic climate change? And might those problems still be leading us to long-term catastrophe? These are important questions to answer. But when we look at the data, a fascinating fact emerges. As we have used more fossil fuels, our resource situation, our environment situation, and our climate situation have been improving too. More fossil fuels, more resources, better environment, safer climate. Let's start with the popular prediction that we're running out of resources, especially fossil fuels. If the predictions were right that we were running out of fossil fuel resources, then nearly doubling fossil fuel use worldwide should have practically depleted us of fossil fuels, even faster than Paul Ehrlich and others predicted. That's certainly what the experts told us in the 1970s. In a 1977 televised address, Jimmy Carter, conveying conventional wisdom at the time, told the nation, "We could use up all of the proven resources of oil in the entire world by the end of the next decade." A popular Saudi expression at the time captured this idea. My father rode a camel, I drive a car, my son flies a jet airplane, his son will ride a camel. Well, no one in the oil business is riding a camel because as fossil fuel use has increased, fossil fuel resources have increased. How is that possible? The measure for fossil fuel resources is proven reserves, which is the amount of coal, oil, or gas that it is available to us affordably given today's technology. While these statistics are subject to some manipulation, sometimes countries and companies can give misleading data. They are the best information we have, and we have historically under-predicted availability. Let's look at the reserves from 1980 to the present for oil and gas, the fossil fuels we are traditionally afraid will run out. Coal is much easier to find and extract, and it is considered to be the fossil fuel that is least likely to run out. Notice how the more we consume, the more reserves increase. This is counterintuitive. The more we use, the more we have. How did this happen? Stay tuned. Why did so many expect catastrophic depletion? Again, there was a failure to think big picture. Many experts paid attention only to our consumption of oil and gas resources, but not our ability to create new oil and gas resources. It's true that once we burn a barrel of oil, it's gone, but it's also true that human ingenuity can dramatically increase the amount of coal, oil, or gas that is available. It turns out that there are many more times of each in the ground than we have used in the entire history of civilization. It's just a matter of developing the technology to extract them economically. And in general, human beings are amazingly good at using ingenuity to create wealth, which means to create resources. We take the materials around us and make them more valuable. That's how we went from starving in a cave to producing a cornucopia of food that we can enjoy in comfortable homes. The thought leaders did not sufficiently consider these virtues of human beings. What about the prediction that our environment would degrade as we used more fossil fuels and more everything? Our escalating fossil fuel use was definitely supposed to be punished with a much, much dirtier environment. What actually happened? We'll look at all the major measures of environmental quality in Chapter 8, but for now, let's look at clean air and clean water. Both have increased substantially. Here are measurements. Let's see. That's a chart that I'm not going to go into. Overall, the improvement is incredible. And he's talking about the charts that he has here in the book about clean air and clean water. Of course, there are places such as China that have high levels of smog, but the track record of the rest of the world indicates that this can be corrected while using ever-increasing amounts of fossil fuels. Once again, the anti-fossil fuel experts got it completely wrong. Why? Again, by not thinking big picture, by paying attention to only one half of the equation. In the case of fossil fuels, focusing only on the ways in which using them can harm our environment. But fossil fuels, as we discuss in Chapter 6, can also improve our environment by powering machines that clean up nature's health hazards, such as water purification plants that protect us from naturally contaminated water, and sanitation systems that protect us from natural disease and animal waste. Pessimistic predictions often assume that our environment is perfect until humans mess it up. They don't consider the possibility that we can improve our environment. But the data of the last 40 years indicate that we have been doing exactly that, using fossil fuels. Finally, we have to look at what the trend is in the realm of climate change. Catastrophic climate change is the most dire claim about fossil fuels today, and it is associated with many prominent scientific bodies, journals, and media outlets. Although if we go through the writings of the 1970s and 1980s, we see those same bodies declare many things confidently about global cooling, only to contradict themselves several years later. In 1975, the American Meteorological Society told Americans that the climate was cooling, and this meant worse weather. Regardless of long-term trends such as the return of an ice age, unsettled weather conditions now appear more likely than those of the abnormally favorable period which ended in 1972. In 1975, Nature said, a recent flurry of papers has provided further evidence for the belief that the Earth is cooling. There now seems little doubt that changes over the past few years are more than a minor statistical fluctuation. In the late 1970s, the global cooling trend many expected to end in disaster ended with no disaster whatsoever. Since then, those who believe in catastrophic climate change have overwhelmingly focused on global warming due to CO2 emissions from fossil fuels. It has long been known that when CO2 is added to the atmosphere, the greenhouse effect leads to a warming impact. But before the 1970s and 1980s, there was not much fear of a significant enough magnitude to do major harm, or good for that matter. But starting in 1970s, and especially the 1980s, claims of runaway global warming and resulting catastrophic climate change have become popular. How did they fare when compared to reality? Recall that in 1986, James Hansen predicted that if current trends are unchanged, temperatures would rise at 1/2 to 1 degree Fahrenheit in the 90s and 2 to 4 degrees Fahrenheit in the first decade of the 2000s. According to Hansen's own department at NASA, from the beginning to the end of the 90s, temperatures were 0.018 degree Fahrenheit higher, and from 2000 to 2010, temperatures were 0.27 degrees Fahrenheit higher, meaning he was wrong many times over. Recall also that journalist Bill McKibben, summarizing the claims of Hansen and others, confidently predicted that by now we would burn up, to put it bluntly. Looking at the actual data on a graph, it becomes clear that he was completely wrong. Here's a graph of the last 100+ years of temperature compared to the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere. We can see that CO2 emissions rose rapidly, most rapidly in the last 15 years, but there's not nearly the warming or the pattern of warming that we have been led to expect. We can see a very mild warming trend overall over a century, which in itself is unremarkable, given that there's always a trend one way or the other, depending on the time scale you select. But notice there are smaller trends of warming and cooling, signifying that CO2 is not a particularly powerful driver, and especially notice that the current trend is flat when it should be skyrocketing. Given how much our culture is focused on the issue of CO2-induced global warming, it's striking how little warming there has actually been. But most striking to me are the data on how dangerous the climate has become over the past few decades, during a time when all of the predictions said that the Earth would become progressively more deadly. The key statistic here, one that is unfortunately almost never mentioned, is climate-related deaths. I learned about this statistic from the work of the prolific global trends researcher Inder Gocklani, who tracks changes over time in how many people die from a climate-related cause, including droughts, floods, storms, and extreme temperatures. Before you look at the data, ask yourself, given what you hear in the news about the climate becoming more and more dangerous, what would you expect the change in the annual rate of climate-related deaths to be since CO2 in the atmosphere started increasing significantly about 80 years ago, When I speak at college, I sometimes get answers such as 5 times, even 100 times greater death rates. And from the headlines, it does look as though the tragedies like Superstorm Sandy are the new normal. The data say otherwise. In the last 80 years, as CO2 emissions have most rapidly escalated, the annual rate of climate-related deaths worldwide fell by an incredible rate of 98%. That means the incidence of death from climate is 50 times lower than it was 80 years ago. The first time I read this statistic, I didn't think it was possible. But my colleagues and I at the Center for Industrial Progress have mined the data extensively, and that is that dramatic and positive. And it is that dramatic and positive. Because the numbers are so startling, in Chapter 5, I'll explain them in depth. Once again, the leading experts we were told to rely on were 100% wrong. It's not that they predicted disaster and got half a disaster. It's that they predicted disaster and got dramatic improvement. Clearly, something was wrong with their thinking, and we need to understand what it is because they are once again telling us to stop using the most important energy source in our civilization, and we are listening. Why did so many predict increasing climate danger when the reality turned out to be increasing climate safety as we used more fossil fuels? Once again, they didn't think big picture. They seemed to be looking only at potential risks of fossil fuels, not the benefits. Clearly, as the climate-related death data show, there were some major benefits, namely the power of fossil-fueled machines to build a durable civilization that is highly resilient to extreme heat, extreme cold, floods, storms, and so on. Why weren't those mentioned in the discussion when we talked about storms like Sandy and Irene? Even though anyone going through those storms was far more protected from them than he or she would have been a century ago. And so that was part 2 of this chapter from the book, The Moral Case for Fossil Fuels. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, chapter 6 from the book Hondo. And it's about Hondo Lane, who is a dispatch rider for a general. And he is out looking for Company C because he has some dispatches that he needs to give to them. And on his way, he meets Angie Lowe, Mrs. Lowe, and her son, and they have a small ranch in the middle of Apache country. He warns her that the Apaches are going to be on the warpath and they're going to be killing every white person they possibly can. But she says she's never had problems with the Apaches. This is her home. She's going to stay there, and that's that. So Hondo Lane has to go ahead and continue on. He does, and he comes across the remains of Company C. The Company C has been absolutely slaughtered. Lieutenant Clayton, it's Lieutenant Davis, Clayton Davis. And Lieutenant Davis is dead. They're all dead. So now he's going to, on his way back to the fort, that was chapter 5. And now chapter 6, we get to get caught up with what's happening with Miss Lowe and her son. The storm, sweeping westward across the vast reach of desert and mountain, had crossed the little ranch in the basin before it reached Hondo Lane and the bodies of Company C's fallen veterans. It had come roaring out of the sky, driving before it a barrage of rain that pelted the dry soil, lifting dust as it struck, and bringing to the air that peculiar odor that comes when rain first strikes dry ground. Not even the cliff protected the cabin from the force of the storm or from the roar of thunder, but it was filled with warmth, comfort, and the smell of coffee. But it was a house empty, for the man was gone. The sound of rushing water and the usual dry wash frightened her a little, for she had seen those torrents move all before them, and had seen them come when the sky was clear above and rain only over the distant mountains. Yet now the rain was general, and the parched earth of her garden drank it eagerly. Some water would remain in the hollow behind the washed-out dam, too. It would last a few weeks, enough so she could irrigate several times, and so it might be the difference between a good crop and none at all. Johnny was unnaturally quiet, watching her, his face serious. "Will the man come back, Mommy?" "I don't know, Johnny. He's very busy." Same question was haunting her own thoughts. Would he return? And why should he? But if he did, what would she do? The thought disturbed her. Why should she think of doing anything? What was there to do? Worried by her own feelings, she sorted clothes for washing, then dusted and mopped, doing work she had not planned to do, merely to keep her thoughts occupied. Yet she kept wondering about him. Had he found shelter? Remembering the incidents of his visit, she tried to tell herself that he was hard, cruel. His attitude toward the dog, toward Johnny, all of it. Yet in her heart she knew he was not cruel. Hard, yes, but how else could he be? And how deep did the hardness go? What lessons he had learned had come to him in a bitter school. It was the way he knew of learning. A hard way, but a fast way that taught its lessons well. She remembered the way he had come off the pallet, gun in hand. What life had a man lived who could be so alert even in sleep? It was nearly sundown when the rain ended at the basin, and she went outside. The air was miraculously cool and washed clean and clear. To breathe, it was like drinking cold water. The sky was still a broken mass of cloud, and thunder rumbled off in the canyon of the faraway western hills. Lowering masses of cloud filled the hollows of the hills and nestled in the saddles where the ridge dipped low. Occasionally, the bulging domes of cloud flared incandescent with distant lightning. Leaves dripped, water whispered against the banks of the wash, brown and swirling. She fed the horses and stood silent in the yard, looking around at the hills. He was gone. Even his tracks were gone. What kind of a woman was she? A married woman and a mother, to be thinking like this of any man. A man who had gone as if he had never been, but that was not true. His footprints were gone from the yard, yet something remained. Something intangible, yet present. Something that set her heart yearning toward the way his horse had gone, that made her remember the way he walked, the strange, somber, almost lonely expression of his eyes, the hunger in them when she had looked up suddenly and met his gaze. She flushed, remembering it, and the way he had kissed her, and what he had said. A woman walks with her head up, ought to kiss a man before she dies. She repeated the words, feeling the heavy beat of her heart. What a strange thing to say to a woman. And the way he had kissed her. Not fierce, not possessive, not demanding, and yet so much more. Slow drops from the eaves fell into the barrel placed to catch the runoff. In the late dusk, the hills were unnaturally green and lovely after the rain. She would take the horses out to the hills in the morning and picket them on the grass where she could keep watch on them from the garden. She walked to the corral and put her hand on the wet top rail and looked against the hills. The hills etched themselves against the sky, darkening in gray. It would be lonely now, lonely as never before. She turned quickly from the thought, gathering her skirt in a quick gesture and biting her lip against sudden tears. She brushed them away hastily and, squaring her shoulders, walked to the house. Yet in the door, as if reluctant to close it finally against the night where he had gone, she turned again to look toward the hills. And the silent hills lay still. Even in the moments of her walking, their green had gone, and the dark wings of night shadowed the basin. She closed the door and dropped the bar in place. It was no use to think. He was a man with his life to live, a man who had stopped for a night, bought a horse, and ridden away. Other men had come and gone. He was no different. Yet, he was. This was her home. She had no time for pilgrim thoughts to go wandering away over the hills after a strange rider. She had a home and a son. It was like her that she no longer thought of Ed. She did not believe him killed, but he would not come back, not unless he was hurt and running. He was out of her life, a boy who'd taken vows it took a man to keep, and a woman. And keep them she had, only now he was gone, and their marriage was a shadow thing that had left only Johnny behind it. And even here Ed seems to have failed. He was a man who left his mark upon nothing, not even upon his son. It was enough to think of her son, enough to see that he grew tall and strong, and that he became a citizen of his land, a father of children in his time, that he learned to build instead of destroy, that he learned to use the land and protect it, not waste the wealth it gave. This was her mission, her problem. There was something her father had said. We do not own the land, Angie. We hold it in trust for tomorrow. We take our living from it, but we must leave it rich for your son and for his sons and for all of those who shall follow. Yet, as she put supper on the table, her thoughts were not upon the land. They were hearing the creak of a saddle and a big man's slow voice, quiet in the room. And when she lay in bed and drew the blankets high, she looked up into the darkness and remembered Johnny's question. Will the man come back, Mommy? The morning was nearly gone when Angie took the 2 buckets and walked to the well. The sun was high and only a few lost tufts of cottony cloud floated in the wide sky. All morning she had worked steadily around the house, only going out to feed the horses and to check the amount of water behind the dam. There was not so much as she had hoped, but enough to irrigate her garden several times. She had cleared mud away from the gate her father had built so the water would be free to flow when it was opened. Her decision to take the horses to the hills had been changed in favor of discretion. She did not believe the Apaches would ever bother her, but horses were a temptation she did not intend to make too inviting. She filled the first bucket, then the second. She heard no sound and was standing looking toward the hills when something made her turn. An Indian had come from the trees and sat the back of his rough-looking paint pony, staring at her. She had heard no sound, no movement. Another appeared, then another, and then they began to materialize from the trees as though by magic, until there were a dozen. She had seen them ride by from time to time. She had seen them at the spring, yet this was the first time she had seen so many at such close range. They were men of medium height who seemed shorter than their height because of wide shoulders and deep chests. Most of their faces were flat-lipped and cruel, but all were sinewy and powerful in build, dark-skinned and dusty now, their lank black hair hanging to their shoulders, bound only with headbands. One of these men sat a very striking pony, and by his looks, Angie knew him for their leader. Her eyes looked past him at a tall, evil-looking Apache who whispered something to the older man, who seemed to be a chief. From the mane of the tall Indian's horse hung several strips of bloody flesh and hair, scalps, and none of them more than a day old. She felt herself turn faint and sick, but she forced herself to stand straight. Pale and frightened, she nevertheless managed to keep her voice strong as she spoke to the older man. You are Vittorio. I am the one who is called Vittorio. Your horses have watered here. His flat black eyes made no change. His face might have been hewn from mahogany. You were warned. I could not leave. My husband is away, and this is my home. Vittorio looked at her, and the Indians waited. A vagrant breeze caught at the drying dust of the yard, and it swirled briefly and then died. The cottonwoods rustled among themselves. This is an Apache spring. The Apaches live in the mountains, Angie replied. They do not need this spring. I have a son. I do need it. But when the Apache comes this way, where shall he drink? His throat is dry. You would keep him from water. There's water yonder, she pointed to the hills. But if the people of Vittorio come in peace, they may drink. When have I denied them? Vittorio's voice was shaded with impatience, and with a stab of fear, she knew that talking was over. It is sworn that there will be no whites in Apache territory. He turned on the tall Indian. Silva! He spoke rapidly in the Apache tongue, and Angie saw the quick grin on Silva's face. The tall Indian slid from his pony. He touched the mane of Vittorio's palomino and said something, evidently comparing it with the color of Angie's hair. Then he drew his knife and started toward her. She did not scream. She could not, nor would she let them see her fear. She stood straighter, putting contempt in her face. and then Johnny came out of the door. He had the Walker Colt. He was holding the big pistol up and pointing it at Silva. Silva stopped, and one of the Indians chuckled. Even Silva grinned at the ludicrous sight of the boy holding a pistol nearly as large as himself and so obviously determined. Angie wheeled and started for the rifle on the porch, but an Indian grabbed her from behind. As he did so, the gun bellowed. The gun was tipped high, and when it went off, the bullet creased Silva's scalp, knocking him down. Johnny, knocked backward by the kick of the huge pistol, also fell. Jerking loose from the Indian who held her, Angie ran to Johnny. Silva lay still on the ground, unconscious. Vittoro sat on his pony, his face showing no expression. He looked at the boy. "You are the mother of a strong son," he said quietly. "And as well you have no man. You might raise an army of warriors to fight my people." "I have no wish to fight your people," Angie spoke softly with dignity. "Your people have your ways, I have mine. I live in peace when I am left in peace. I did not think," her chin lifted, "that the great Vittoro made war upon women." Vittoro slid from his horse and drew his knife. Angie clutched her son, wishing she had picked up the pistol, knowing now that it would do no good. There was nothing anyone could do now. He walked toward them, a bigger man than she had believed, and every inch the chief. The Indians behind him sat on their horses in silence. Vittoro picked up Johnny's hand and nicked his thumb with the point of the knife, then his own. He pressed them together, their blood mingling. "He is my blood brother. I name him Small Warrior of the Moondog Lodge of the Chiricahua Apache." He looked at Angie, a flicker of something that might have been kindness in his eyes. "You will care for him well. As mother of a Chiricahua warrior, you may live here in safety." Silva came swiftly to his feet, staring around. He put a hand to his head. It came away bloody. Knife in hand, he started forward, but Vittoro spoke sharply. Sulking, Silva turned and strode to his pony. Angie clutched Johnny. Vittoro swung to the back of the Palomino. "I knew you were a great warrior," she said. "I hope someday someone befriends your sons." The iron face turned bleakly savage. "My sons are dead in a white man's prison." They rode swiftly off. Only Silva looked back, and Angie caught that look. From that day on, she knew only Vittoro stood between her and the shame and anger of Silva, and she knew the story of Silva's defeat would be told in the villages, and his hate would harden to an evil thing. She lifted the pistol from the ground. It had been loaded. Even when he was not with them, Hondo Lane had been the reason of their security. It was he that had advised her and had loaded the pistol. And that was the conclusion of Chapter 6 for the book Hondo Lane by Louis L'Amour. Back in a minute. Thank you. I'm Ron, your host, and the only true conservative in the United States today, bidding adios to all of the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers, and reminding you to listen to the John and Ken Show on KFI AM 640, Monday through Friday from 2 p.m. to 6 p.m. Pacific Time. Also, KFI needs to bring back Brian Suits and his show, The Dark Secret Place. Hashtag bring back Brian Suits. Until next time, be honest, be smart, be beautiful, and remember that the left has no authority, no power, and they can't win.